You know, it's amazing to go back over the files and find small. Every Sunday night, Ed Sullivan made millions of people smile. However, something that occurred in 1955 caused him to lose it. Witnesses couldn't believe the comments that came out of Sullivan's mouth when a teenage musician modified one of the songs. His carefully constructed image was ruined by a racial insult he used. The altercation nearly descended into violence. They had to be separated by staff. For many years, nobody discussed it. The musician was permanently barred. However, his performance on live television that evening altered the course of rock and roll. Ed Sullivan was born in Harlem, New York on September 28, 1901, as one half of a twin set. Daniel, his twin brother, was ill from birth and lived for only a few months. The fact that Ed was the only twin to survive cast a cloud over his early years. He was shaped even as a young lad by a sense of emptiness and silent despair. Peter and Elizabeth, his Irish parents, had a large family. Only 5 of the 8 children, including Ed, made it through infancy. The home was simultaneously alive and grieving. Another tragedy struck while Ed was only 5 years old. The death of his infant sister devastated the family once more. The pain was too much for Elizabeth to bear any longer. She made the decision that they would relocate to the small community of Port Chester, which is located north of Harlem. There was more peace and quiet in Port Chester. Ed never truly moved on from the losses, despite his parents' hopes that the shift would aid in their recovery. Ed learned to cope with sadness even as a young child. Ed lived in spite of everything, and he was frequently referred to as the miracle child. He grew up surrounded by various cultures and music because he was born into a neighborhood where Jewish and Irish families coexisted. Ed observed the transition from horse-drawn carriages to cars. Only 5 of the 8 children, including him, survived past infancy. Life was a constant reminder of its frailty. He was cherished by his parents, particularly his mother. He was a miracle to them. Grief was always there in the home, but music was a comfort. The Sullivans filled the rooms with sound as they sang together around the piano. They used music as a coping mechanism. Ed would never be able to break the habit. He would still recall those early days, even after becoming a well-known television host, and how a song could lighten difficult situations. Ed also started to exhibit his need for control as he got older. He was a standout athlete in high school. 12 sports letters were awarded to him between 1916 and 1919. A ferocious halfback on the football field he was, a speedy guard on the basketball court, at the track a quick runner. But as a catcher and captain, baseball was where he really excelled. He was formed by these athletics. They helped him develop his discipline and leadership skills. He also enjoyed taking charge. As the team's captain, Ed instructed his teammates on how to play and where to stand. His fame grew along with the championships he won. He gained a sense of authority from the function, which would be even more important for his career. Ed fled to Chicago at the age of 17 in an attempt to join the Navy when America entered World War I. However, they sent him home since he was too young and without documentation. That failed attempt demonstrated his audacity. It also steered him in a different direction. Ed had also learned to write by that time. In school, he edited the school newspaper and published sports columns. He was hired by the Port Chester Daily Item shortly after graduating. Ed enjoyed every bit of it, and they paid him $1 for each article. It was the beginning of his journalism career, which would later lead him to the New York Evening Graphic, the Associated Press, the Hartford Post, and the New York Evening Mail. His passions had always been writing and sports, which helped him get ready for a far larger platform. Ed learned about fairness from sports as well. He played with black athletes as a child without giving it much thought. He found it instinctive. He didn't find it odd when he went to games in Connecticut and saw teams with black players. He never wavered in his conviction in equality. Even when other presenters refused to give black performers a platform, Ed Sullivan did so later when he had his own television show. Ed Sullivan believed that joining the Hartford Post in 1919 would be a significant advancement in his career. He was hoping for new prospects at a larger paper after leaving the Port Chester Daily Item. However, that strategy was quickly derailed. Before he had a chance to settle there, He lost his job when the Hartford Post folded in his first week of employment. It was an odd and unfortunate setback, particularly considering how popular newspapers were at the time. Rarely do papers close their doors after a few days. When Sullivan saw how unstable the newspaper industry could be, he had to start the job search anew. This did not, however, slow him down. Rather, it strengthened his resolve to continue. Early on, the brief and agonizing lesson molded his perseverance and determination. Sullivan was able to bounce back and start working as a sports reporter for the New York Evening Mail after the Hartford Post folded. However, that paper too stopped publication in 1923. This was the start of a difficult time during which he moved from failing newspaper to newspaper to newspaper. The Associated Press, the Philadelphia Bulletin, the Morning World, the Morning Telegraph, the New York Bulletin, and the Leader were among the publications he worked for between 1923 and 1927. He had to hunt for a new job every time one paper failed. Most individuals would have given up because this was a difficult cycle. Sullivan just wouldn't give up. Every job turned into an opportunity to expand his network and sharpen his talents. Even though it was unpredictable and draining, it demonstrated his genuine love for journalism. So, particularly significant were the years spent with the Associated Press. One of the most reputable news outlets in the world at the time was the Associated Press. Sullivan continued to freelance for other publications such as the Morning Telegraph and the Philadelphia Bulletin. But his position with the app provided him with more significant assignments and national stories. Sullivan had experience covering everything from breaking news to sports during this time, which ended in 1927. He established a strong reputation as someone who could adapt and tell compelling stories despite having to shift jobs frequently. He had established himself as a competent reporter by the time he left the app. Sullivan made his second significant move in the same year. He began working as a sports writer for the New York Evening Graphic in 1927. The Graphic had a reputation for daring, frequently scandalous stories and was noisy and ostentatious. There, Sullivan flourished and advanced swiftly. His first steady leadership position was as a sports editor. He also met one of the most well-known gossip columnists of the era, Walter Winchell, at the Graphic. The Graphic's Broadway columnist was Sullivan after Winchell left for the Daily Mirror in 1929. That piece provided him a new type of influence and exposed him to the entertainment industry. Sullivan was already well known by the time the firm dissolved in 1932. He started writing Broadway columns for the New York Daily News in 1932. He started writing his well-known column, Little Old New York, at that point. Before 1974, readers checked it daily for 42 years. Sullivan wrote on the city's biggest stars' private lives, Broadway productions, and well-known actors. His voice was fair, incisive, and constantly in the middle of the action, which is why people loved it. Someone may become famous overnight with only one remark from Sullivan. In order for readers outside of New York to follow the drama, his column was also syndicated. Sullivan adjusted to every new development in the entertainment industry year after year. He remained at the top because of that. Sullivan worked as a talent scout as well. There was more to Little Old New York than rumors. It served as the major break for aspiring actors and performers. Sullivan had the ability to spot talent before anyone else did. His column may launch a career with just one encouraging remark. However, a single statement may destroy a reputation if he didn't like someone. Producers and actors realized that one line could determine the fate of their program, so they looked at his column every morning. Sullivan was not merely a news reporter. He was molding it. He was present at all the large parties and theater openings outside the newspaper headquarters. Sullivan was present wherever something occurred. However, New York's nightlife also served as a battlefield. Sullivan opened an establishment at the renowned El Morocco Club. His unofficial headquarters were there. Walter Winchell, his competitor, held court at the Stork Club across town. In these glamorous locations where politicians and movie stars spend their evenings, both men vied for attention. The contest included all of the well-known faces that entered. Winchell's Stork Club was well known for its exclusive clientele and stringent door policy. El Morocco by Sullivan was well known for its glitz and strength. Everyone was aware of the competition between these two columnists who controlled New York's nightlife. In the city, it became one of the most talked about stories. One's reputation might be made or broken by being spotted visiting either club. Furthermore, Sullivan wasn't content to merely write. He made the same decision as Winchell to dominate radio. His first radio program, The E.D. Sullivan Show, debuted on CBS in 1932. He gained new fans and well-known guests like George M. Cohan and Jack Benny thanks to that show. Sullivan persisted, hosting Ed Sullivan's Pipelines in 1946, Ed Sullivan Variety in 1941, and Ed Sullivan Entertains from 1943 to 1944. His name spread into more homes with each show. For him, radio was ideal. It allowed him to communicate showbiz rumors more quickly and with a larger audience. Because he was a familiar voice, people started to trust him. He could do more than compose, as demonstrated by radio. In 1948, CBS made a bold decision. They chose Ed Sullivan to host Toast of the Town, their new Sunday night variety show. Sullivan had no prior TV experience and was a newspaper columnist. Producer Marlo Lewis of CBS believed that Sullivan's straightforward approach may be effective. Sullivan was uncertain. I've already done everything they're promised to do. He made a joke. On June 20, 1948, the first episode, which had a meager $11,775 budget, broadcast. Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin received only $200 for their appearances. Sponsors were afraid. CBS CEO William Paley had faith in him, despite executives' concerns that he wasn't showy enough. Sullivan worked hard to secure high-profile guests and help the show become a success for over 2 decades. That achievement wasn't painless. He was despised by critics. His wooden delivery struck them as terrible. He had no personality at all, according to Harriet Van Horn. He was described as stiff, uncomfortable, and hopeless by other critics. It was personal to Sullivan. He even once sent Van Horn a brief, obnoxious letter. At home, however, people continued to observe. Alan King even made a joke about Sullivan doing nothing, but outperformed everyone. Sullivan had to learn to accept it. He allowed comedians to mimic him. His popularity increased as a result. The fact that he could make fun of himself pleased the audience. Despite the mockery of critics, audiences continued to return. Sullivan's peculiar manner became a defining characteristic of the show. He appeared anxious on camera. He always slouched his shoulders. He had a nasal voice. He was suspected of having Bell's palsy. His smile was likened by Time magazine as a person sucking a lemon. However, he was perfectly okay. He received a lot of letters complimenting his bravery. His wooden movements were imitated by comedians. That contributed to his fame. This photograph was never contested by Sullivan. He actually welcomed it. He became one of the most adored personalities in entertainment because of his humor and honesty. The event had relocated to a new location by 1953. 1697 Broadway is home to CBS Studio 50. Built in 1927, it was an old theater. The interior was opulent, with stained glass and a Gothic ceiling. Fitting cameras and equipment inside required effort. To prevent interference, even the adjoining subway had to be protected. This theater was a favorite of Sullivan. In 1967, CBS changed its name to the E.D. Sullivan Theater to commemorate 20 years of broadcasting. For a TV personality, that was an uncommon accolade. That theater still stands today. Later, Stephen Colbert and David Letterman would call it home. However, the majority of people recall it because of Sullivan and the numerous celebrities that performed there. Initially, the show was still referred to as Toast of the Town. This, in Sullivan's opinion, did not adequately acknowledge him. It was already perceived by audiences as his show. CBS changed its name to The Ed Sullivan Show on September 25, 1955. Sullivan cared about that. It demonstrated his status as one of the most influential guys on TV. He would include Elvis Presley a year later. A total of 60 million people watched Elvis. At the time, that was a TV record. That enormous crowd and the new moniker solidified Sullivan's reputation for all time. However, working with Sullivan wasn't always simple. Backstage on November 20, 1955, was Bo Diddley. Sullivan heard him perform Tennessee Ernie Ford's smash hit, 16 Tons. In just 3 weeks, that song had sold over 1 million copies. Diddley was instructed to play it by Sullivan. Diddley consented, most likely believing it would advance his career. However, he believed he was destined to accomplish both when he spotted cue cards that stated Bo Diddley 16 Tons. He decided to play his own song, Bo Diddley, on the air instead. One of the most rebellious moments in early TV history was brought about by that decision. Diddley appeared on an R&B show. The audience erupted when he sang his own song. Sullivan was enraged. Diddley left a lasting effect with his unadulterated energy and well-known rhythm. For the first time, a lot of Americans heard that catchy Bo Diddley beat. Despite just lasting 2 minutes, it had a lasting impact on rock and roll. Sullivan was upset when the cameras ceased. At Diddley, he screamed. Diddley and witnesses claimed that Sullivan even referred to him as the first black boy to ever betray him. That was a startling act of racism. Although Sullivan had previously advocated for black artists, his bias and irritability were exposed here. The altercation was intense. They had to be restrained by staff. The altercation almost descended into violence. Diddley felt the need to strike Sullivan. Diddley's management made an effort to soothe him. The management cautioned that it was Ed Sullivan. Diddley was unconcerned. He will never again work on television, Sullivan informed him. Sullivan said, "You won't last 6 months." Diddley was prohibited from going back. Millions of people adored Ed Sullivan on TV. However, Betty, his daughter, has presented a completely different account. According to her, her father was infamously irascible over the tiniest things. Ed was composed and affable in public. He was easily enraged in private. At home, Betty remembered an instance where Ed had yelled and slammed doors after a minor argument. Family members learned to avoid him at all costs. They had no idea what could trigger him. He hardly ever displayed this temper on TV. It remained concealed under the well-known courteous grin. It was extremely genuine at home, though, and his loved ones had to deal with this erratic side on a daily basis. Additionally, Betty claimed that Ed was very different from his public image when the cameras were not rolling. Because of his show, he was perceived as gregarious and extroverted. He was actually rather introverted. He enjoyed being by himself. He would frequently hide in his dressing room after a broadcast rather than celebrating or interacting with guests. He might read the newspaper or watch TV in silence for hours even at home. This was not a passing mood. He was just naturally that way. Even his coworkers occasionally perceived him as distant or frigid due to the stark contrast between his public persona as a gregarious presenter and his private life as a reclusive man. His concerns at the height of the Cold War had a darker aspect as well. One of Betty's stories concerned Ed's growing conviction that her partner had communist sympathies. It occurred somewhere in the late 1950s or early 1960s, when America was gripped by a widespread fear of communism. Betty was interrogated by Ed regarding the boy's past. He thought of kicking him out of the house. He believed his daughter was involved with a subversive, so he even sought counsel from others. There was absolutely no evidence to support this baseless suspicion. Even Ed Sullivan, who openly advocated for civil rights and invited African American artists to perform on his show, was unable to avoid the paranoia of the day. Ed was also a man who kept his feelings to himself. Rob, his grandson, prepared by explaining that Ed hardly ever shown affection or discussed emotions. Rob thought Ed had put up this emotional facade to cover up his suffering. Ed had a sister who died at an early age and a twin brother who died as a baby. He became cautious about his emotions as a result of these losses. He maintained a somber demeanor even as an adult and restrained himself. Rob believed that this contributed to Ed's chilly demeanor toward both outsiders and even some members of his family. He was a man who felt more than he could express, though, beneath that tough veneer. It influenced his personality and how he responded to the demands of celebrity. His interactions with performers also revealed the same conflict between his private conduct and public persona. The Doors were scheduled to perform live on his show on September 17, 1967. The producers instructed them to alter a line in Light My Fire before they took the stage. They believed that the word higher implied drug use, so they wanted it removed. The musicians told the producers what they wanted to hear during rehearsal by nodding and agreeing. However, Jim Morrison informed the others that they would not be making any changes as soon as they left the room. The rest of the band, despite their nervousness, supported him. "I thought they were kidding," guitarist Robbie Krieger said afterwards. "Fuck it," I said. "Let's proceed in the same manner." They made the decision to resist. The show was live that evening. As always, Ed introduced them with grace. After playing one song, they began to play Light My Fire. The camera started rolling. Millions of people watched. Morrison sung Girl. We couldn't get much higher just when it counted. The audience adored it. The atmosphere backstage was quite different. The producers were upset. After the performance, Ed Sullivan himself entered their dressing room. According to witnesses, he became enraged and swore at them, accusing them of betraying the networks and the show's confidence. The band was informed that they would not be performing again. It had no effect on the Doors. Jim Morrison famously responded when someone warned them they would never play on the show again. "But we just did," he added with a cool shrug and a small smile. The band's spirit was encapsulated in only one line. They had achieved their goal. They had been on one of America's largest platforms. And they had remained authentic. Interviews, documentaries, and motion pictures continue to capture that moment decades later. The Rolling Stones made an appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show on January 15, 1967. "Let's Spend the Night Together," their brand new hit, was scheduled to be performed. Ideally. However, the title was deemed too suggestive for family television by CBS and the show's creators. They instructed the band to either alter its lyrics or stop playing altogether. The Stones consented under duress. "Let's spend some time together instead," they sang. At the time, it was significant. The original lyrics were deemed too subversive by American television, which was strict. The Stones weren't pleased despite their agreement. The incident gained notoriety. It depicted the conflict between TV censorship and rock music. It also demonstrated the influence that television has on artists. Radio stations did the same. Many of them refused to play the song at all or bleep the word night. The song's popularity in America suffered as a result. However, the UK was unconcerned. There, the song was uncensored. However, the Stones were seen as rebellious even in those days. They were already well known for pushing limits. Their reputation was enhanced by their contentious lip sync at the London Palladium on Sunday night. As one of the most well-known censorship conflicts in rock history, the Ed Sullivan moment stuck in everyone's memory. Mick Jagger made a point during the performance. He rolled his eyes at the camera each time he sang, "Let's spend some time together." Whoa. Even though it was a minor shift, many took note. The sarcastic eye rolls were obvious. It was his method of expressing their disapproval of the development. Both the producers and the audience witnessed it. Eye rolls gained notoriety as a subdued form of protest. The Stones had consented to alter the lyrics in contrast to Jim Morrison of the Doors, who refused to do so and was banned. However, their spirit remained unwavering. Mick's eye rolls demonstrated that they could both adhere to the regulations and make fun of them. A lot of individuals believed this was prearranged. Some said that was simply Mick being himself. In any case, it will never be forgotten. Those brief moments are still cited as the ideal illustration of how a band might revolt without breaching the law. There was another well-known altercation with Ed Sullivan a few years prior. Comedian Jackie Mason made an appearance on the show in October 1964. Mason's performance was interrupted as President Lyndon B. Johnson made a live statement. Sullivan informed Mason that he had 2 minutes remaining when the broadcast resumed by raising 2 fingers off the screen. Mason started joking about fingers. He kept shouting, "Here's a finger for you and a finger for you," while pointing at several persons. Mason, in Sullivan's opinion, was gesturing indecently toward him. Mason's thumb appeared to Sullivan to be a middle finger. Sullivan was enraged. He terminated Mason's 6-appearance contract after the performance. At the time, that deal was for $45,000, which is more than $450,000 today. Mason was erratic and ill, Sullivan told the media. Mason denied ever being rude to Sullivan. However, no one took him seriously. Mason lost his libel suit against Sullivan. The story was widely reported by the media. Mason's career suffered greatly. Sullivan was strong. If you fought with him, you would lose your job. Mason was prohibited from watching most TV. His recovery took nearly 2 decades. Mason's reputation remained tarnished even after Sullivan expressed regret and allowed him to return to the show. He was known as the comedian who made a mistake on live television. He was deemed too dangerous to book by the producers. Mason was made to perform biting sections in little clubs. He didn't revive his career till years later. Everyone was still aware of the finger incident at that time. Crossing someone like Sullivan was a hard lesson. Sullivan did more than host. He guarded the gate. A career could be ruined if you disagree with him. Additionally, Sullivan had tight rules on who might appear on his show. His regulations had to be followed by many artists. Elvis Presley and other celebrities had to film from the waist up, and what was appropriate was frequently decided by Sullivan. He did, however, have a side that few anticipated. He booked more black singers than most hosts at the time, despite his tendency to be gruff and domineering. Sullivan provided a nationwide platform for African American musicians, dancers, and singers beginning in 1948. Racism and segregation were still prevalent at the time. He was advised by certain sponsors to cease booking them. He was once instructed to stop by a Ford executive. He was ejected from the theater by Sullivan. Sullivan emphasized that talent was more important than prejudice. James Brown, the Supremes, the Temptations, Sammy Davis Jr., Louis Armstrong, and Ella Fitzgerald all appeared on his show. Civil rights activists such as Coretta Scott King also made an appearance. Sullivan took genuine chances. For that reason, he was adored by many. Others believed him to be deceitful. Behind the scenes, he had a reputation for blacklisting artists like Bo Diddley who disobeyed him. He did more than others, however, to promote black talent on screen. Sullivan continued to broadcast his show 23 years, from June 20th, 1948 to June 6, 1971. It was broadcast on CBS. More than 1,000 episodes, that is. Millions of Americans watched every Sunday. From the Beatles to Elvis Presley, Sullivan exposed them to the world. Also performing were comedians Carol Burnett and Richard Pryor. On February 9, 1964, around 73 million people attended the Beatles' performance. At the time, that was a record. Sullivan's rigorous control was well known. Only the waist of Elvis was seen. The words have to be altered by the Rolling Stones. Nevertheless, a career could be made or broken by performing on Sullivan. The show's eventual cancellation by CBS in 1971 felt like the end of an era. After that, Sullivan himself didn't survive long. Sylvia, his wife, passed away on March 16, 1973. After meeting in 1926, they were wed on April 28, 1930. At first, they kept their connection a secret because he was Catholic and she was Jewish. They even disclosed to her family that Ed Solomon was Sullivan's real identity. In 1930, they finally eloped in City Hall. Elizabeth, their daughter, was born 8 months later. They were a team, the Sullivans. After each performance, Ed frequently received candid criticism from Sylvia. He was devastated when she passed away in 1973. Sullivan received a diagnosis of esophageal cancer a year later. His family chose not to be completely honest with him. They believed it would cause him too much distress. Sullivan was gone in a matter of weeks. At the age of 73, he passed away on October 13, 1974. St. Patrick's Cathedral hosted his funeral. Sullivan didn't remember who he was. Paul McCartney later recounted when he saw him. By then, Sullivan was a completely different person. Years later, his grandson Rob and daughter Betty talked of Sullivan's domineering nature. In 1952, Betty wed Bob Precht, the producer of the show. She had witnessed firsthand how Ed handled every little detail. Sullivan's obsession with perfection made him well known. His family was affected as well. Rob related tales of Sullivan's kindness and toughness. The same family-loving man also outlawed entertainers who offended him. The other side of a man who most people assumed was just a stiff TV personality was revealed by these revelations. Sullivan can be angry one minute and warm the next. Only his family truly saw this side of him, despite the fact that millions watched him every Sunday. Long after the cameras had stopped, they could still feel it.